different lower noises. Oh, can you go listen to the live to see if the background?
I want to welcome Mr. Peyton Garmer from Manhattan, Kansas. He is a graduate of Butler Community College in El Dorado, Kansas, currently serving as the assistant livestock judging coach at Kansas State University, working on his master's in animal science. He is a former field intern for the National Swine Registry, and he grew up showing pigs and sheep in 4-H and FA. Let's give him a big Phoenix, Arizona welcome to this Peyton Garmer.
Okay, so when I went to look at it,
As Peyton works through these, I want to recognize early on our arena sponsors and also our Showmanship sponsor. You got to believe it, Livestock Show Camp, that has been very generous in both the sheep and the goat Showmanship competition in their donations today. Our arena sponsors are Agrodyne, All Flex, All Red and Clay Elliott Clubland, Bales Hay Sales, Blue King Weather, Cimarron Trailers, Emerald Livestock, Empire Power Systems, Land Jam, Hummel Livestock, JDS Packerland, KB Livestock Show Supplies, Nutrition by Design, Stock Show Secrets, Sawyer Show Stock, Jason Spence and Space, Jason Spence Company Auctioneers, Sullivan Supply Company, Tractor Supply Company, Weaver Leather, and WW Rodeo Livestock Sales, and our overall Showmanship sponsor, you got to believe it, Livestock Camp. Let's give them a big round of applause and thank them for their generous donations today. Just a quick reminder for those of you in future meets, you have an exhibitor number that was provided at check-in very specific to your showmanship competition. It is written on the back of that card. Please wear that showmanship number when you're attending in the showmanship heats this morning. Do not wear your heat for the market competition.
Well, good morning. I'm certainly excited for today. this day for quite some time to come down to Arizona and work through the Showmanship contest. I had no doubt that we were going to have a really good group to work through the sheep show and the goat show later on today. And the first class here is quite the indicator of what we're going to have to work with. I promise we'll be efficient, but at the same time, my goal is to make sure that we have a competitive and an entertaining championship drive for you guys to watch here in just a little bit. And although we've got a big group and a lot of kids that do a really nice job, the folks here to my left are the ones we're going to ask to come back for our champion drive in a minute. And I think the things that they did that probably separated them was just a few things related to consistency. The minute they walked in that gate, they had the look on their face of a gamer like they were here to win. And then they come out here, and to me, showmanship is about effectively making that animal look the part. And I thought every time I caught a look at these kids out here, those were the sheep that were put together the most collected. Those were the kids that maybe just made it look the easiest. I went through and chatted with the folks on this side about some of the things that they do a really nice job of, because there's some very talented showmen left out here. We can bring probably a few more of them back, but again, my goal is to make an effective championship drive that we can make really competitive. I told these kids some things that maybe in my eyes they could do just a little bit differently next time if they were going to come show to me, but all of them are certainly deserving of some recognition. And man, a great way to get us started here. If you guys would around ringside, let's congratulate all these kids on a really nice job, and we're working down 17.
Thank you, Peyton, and our callbacks are Blake Burns of Gulf, California, Paisley Carlson of Orland, California, and Ephraim Fowler of Salesville, Ohio, Jenna Melson of Calumet Falls, Oregon, and Dayton Morbett from Linville, Iowa, and Early Stratton from Moat, Nevada. We welcome them back to the conclusion of heat number 3 for our championship drive of the Showmanship. As you see around the arena, we have multiple banners hanging. If you, as a sponsor, would like those banners, they're available for $50 each. We ask you to speak specifically to the Livestock Director, Ms. Katie Eslick, and they can be purchased. Also behind this arena is our backdrop, and if you want your photos taken by the multitude of interns out here, we do have that backdrop set up for your photos, and we encourage you to get those on. And we'll also add those into the social media for those of yours from the national. We welcome in heat number 2 of Junior Showmanship, ages 8 to 12.
I can edit it really quick.
We need Caitlin Blackwell of Buckeye, Arizona.
Yeah.
And Holden Live from Brownsville, Texas. Two of you would please come forward into heat number 2 of Junior Showmanship. Somehow got loose and is in 10. F is in Frank, 49. If that is your lamb, your tag 549. That lamb is currently in 10F 49.
Very happy. I can trace her edit and then over like a little bit in messages.
That's too little. One's too little. One's kind of neurotic. I know it's something.
Today is day one.
I was looking at them and they're like in the show ring, walking on the way to the ring.
So the little stuff too and fro.
And then great.
If you weren't here for Heat 1, our showmanship judge today is Peyton Dahmer. Peyton resides in Manhattan, Kansas as assistant livestock judging coach with Chris Molinek and the Kansas State Wildcats. Formerly was at El Dorado at Butler, and we welcome him today as our showmanship judge.
My standard stuff yeah, absolutely. It's nice visiting with you.
Thank you. Right up the top. How's this going? Yeah. 2.5 hours off.
43 years old.
Ow. Yeah. You don't know what's running or anything. I got drugged.
And then the young folks.
Little left hip.
Oh, yeah, a little baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like letting you talk. The only time they get car sick is everybody.
What do you think, Marianne? Yeah. You're in here. You're in here. Yes, you're in here. Sorry. Taking the shot. No. They are. Like teenagers, 17 or 21. That's weird. I think they'll do it, but. Cut me in, coach. I'm good. Pepper. We got it all.
We don't have enough space in our house.
Goats or lamb though?
I think we don't. Because our goats
Right.
we usually give them the top dress for near their calculi and stuff like that. That top God only knows what turns up in our house.
Yes.
Called me from the road.
Early on.
I don't have any friends.
Really? How long? How's it ordered?
Best Life, her Best Life. The girl's courtesy name Herman is his name.
You saw the buck girl?
In heat 3, we are waiting for Audrey Callan of Raleigh, California. Heat 3, please come to the holding area. Audrey Callan.
Over water. I was over it. I'm not a lot too, just like this.
It is different a lot. Oh, I sent you a video.
I didn't watch it, so I don't watch it today.
You have to send it.
Kind of echo the same comments that we had there in the first heat. I thought this group of youngsters did a really, really nice job from top to bottom as well. And I guess to me, we talked about consistency in the first heat, and I think that's what separates these folks here to my right. We're going to have back again. Just those things that from start to finish, maybe just positioning their body on the front of that sheep a little better, getting a better brace out of them. I'm really big on your hands and how you operate that sheep's head and ears, and that's kind of one of the common things I talk to some of these youngsters about, is maybe how we can utilize that head to kind of keep that sheep's nose in the place it needs to be, having those ears up, and then some things related to just how we position ourselves on the front of that sheep. I thought the folks on this side probably just did a nickel more consistently of a job related to those things. But again, my compliments to all these kids. I went through and chatted with these briefly about some of the things I thought they did really well, and then again, some things that maybe they could change if they were going to come show to me again. But if you guys would, again, let's congratulate all the kids here in this really competitive group on an excellent job.
Our callbacks in heat number 2 of junior showmanship are Brady Galindo of California, Jay Hansen of Utah, Aaron Ludlow of Oakdale, California, Lila Shakespeare of Logandale, Nevada, and Addison Zerbach of Roseburg, Oregon. Let's congratulate those 5 young individuals as they come back for our final.
I'm going now.
If you made the final heat in heat 1 or 2, please go to the holding area. We're missing 3 people at this point in time. Please go to the holding area, please, at this point in time.
Oh, there's some.
Our final heat here in the junior division. We keep just a few more out of this heat. I think it was one of the deeper heats that we had, just in terms of the number of kids that know what they're doing. My compliments to all of them. I think some things that probably separated these folks that we talked about, similar to the last heat, are just body position. Maybe a few too many times we get a little twisted around the front of that sheep, or we don't have that nose pointed in the right direction, and it causes that sheep to maybe move around on us just a little bit. I said I'm really big on hand placement on that sheep's head and how they maneuver their head and ears, and I think that's what separated the folks over here. Like I said, a really deep group, so we don't have a set number. We've got to keep in every heat. I opted to keep these 6 just because of the way that they did those things I just talked about. But a really good group here, several of them that I think are deserving of being over here on this side. I talked about maybe just some very finite details that they could do a little bit differently for me next time. But as they exit the ring, let's congratulate all these kids. I think we're going to have a whale of a junior ride.
Okay, our winners in heat number 3 are Audrey Callan of California, Lexi McCaffrey of California, Ace Reckwinkle of Oklahoma, Adelaide Simpson of Arizona, Fallon Yardley of Nevada, and also Holton Wise of Texas. So we welcome all of you back for our finals in junior showmanship. You would swing back through here on the far side as we move in. Again, we want to welcome Peyton Dahmer from Manhattan, Kansas, our showmanship judge. Currently the assistant livestock judging coach for the Kansas State Wildcats, and formerly with Butler Junior College, and we welcome him. Let's give him a big round of applause. As you're finishing up, if you'd like to have your picture taken, remember the backdrops on the back side of this wall here, this false wall. And we encourage you to get your picture taken by one of the multitude of meeting interns here, as well as if you are a sponsor and you desire to have one of those banners. They need to be purchased through Katie Islett, and they are $50 a piece, but they are available for purchase.
You're welcome.
We want to pay special tribute and thanks to You Got It Believe Livestock Camp. They are our sponsor for award the showmanship competition from a primary overall standpoint, both for sheep and goats. And we thank those folks for their generosity today. Also ringside, we have Agridyne, All Flex, All Red Elliott Clubland, Bales, Hay Sales, Blue Weather, or Blue Team Weather, Cimarron Trailers, Emerald Livestock, Empire Power Systems, Glam Jam, Hummel Livestock, JBS Packerland, KD Livestock Show Supply, Nutrition by Design, Destroyer Show Stock, Jason Spence and the Spence and Company Auctioneers, Sullivan Show Supply, Tractor Supply, Weaver Leather Livestock Supply, WW Livestock Scales, and last but not least, our primary sponsor in the showmanship, You Gotta Believe, Livestock Camp. Thank you for your generosity. Let's give all the sponsors a big round of applause.
I have to do that. You might like it. It's on Facebook Live. Oh, Kelly. We should went there with my aunt. Sanders. She loves Sanders house. She's like, I almost didn't go because she was there being there. I'm like, oh really? For now? You're so sweet. I was like, Mom's like, we almost didn't go because Nathan was being an asshole. He was horrible. Valerie, when you have Friday off, you go think about what you're home. Your hot girlfriend. Yeah. She hasn't gotten COVID. Balance out. Yeah. Let's spell it. I'll go back to the Probably not. We're not racing. Right, go get your job done. Oh, I found my mom. All right.
Where's a good place to sit? Just anywhere up here?
And I knew that this junior division was going to be really, really tough when we got all these kids back out here. And quite frankly, we probably ended up with more of them out here than what I initially thought we would or what I wanted to. But that's a testament to how good the quality was. You guys can find out here. Let's back you out there just a little bit. Let's put you front and center for everybody to see. I think all the way down the line here, these kids have done an excellent job. And I would say that I apologize for working them just a little bit longer, but quite frankly, I don't. These kids didn't travel as far as some of them did to Phoenix, Arizona to get just a quick look and pass on by. And so we have to work the kids just a little bit harder, force them to make some of those mistakes or the things that maybe I would change to make sure that each of them get a fair shake out here. And I can tell you that on a different day, these youngsters all the way down the line here could be the ones sitting on this side of the ring. That's how good it was. It comes down to just the things that I'm looking for today. And I've probably mentioned it a couple times, but in my opinion, showmanship isn't about a certain finesse, a certain style, anything like that. To me, it's about who knows how to get the job done. Who knows how to get the most out of that animal every time I come down the line. Who knows their sheep and knows what makes it look good. Who knows what makes it look bad. I think that our top 5 that we've got lined up here do an incredible job. There's some differences in the way they choose to do things. To me, the pair of gentlemen that are going to be 1 and 2, I thought just from the minute they came in the ring earlier to now, are gamers of the group. They know exactly what to do to make that sheep look good. And to me, what's interesting is you can tell right here, they do it completely different. Young man that's going to be our champion showman today, to me, his knowledge of that sheep's body placement, how to make him look the part from the side is incredible. He's got the intensity, the look of a gamer that I talked about, and yet he knows when to drive that thing, he knows when to relax that thing. I come down the line, and the way that he positions himself, the way that he works that sheep's body to keep his top line in check is just incredible. And then he does the things that I probably draw more to just in terms of body position and hand placement. To me, he shows the signs of someone you could give any kind of sheep, and he'd know what he needs to do to make it look the part. And to me, that's what showmanship's all about. That's why he gets to be our champion. Let's congratulate him. Young man here at the south down here, just a little bit differently. He shows her down probably a little bit more than anybody we've got out here. He does get up and brace her when it's time, but I think he's the other one that every time I come down the line, she looks the part. He makes it look so easy. Maybe a little more cool, calm, and collected than the gentleman that just walked out the ring, but he still has that look in his eye like he's here to win. I asked him what place he wanted to be, and he said, of course, first. And so that's the attitude you got to have, in my opinion. He may do things a little bit differently, but I challenge you to find anybody you can go down the line and maybe catch a sheep not looking the part as frequent as his, because he did an excellent job of making her look exactly the way she needed to be. I don't care what style he chooses to do it. To me, he gets the job done, and that's why he gets to be reserved. Let's congratulate him. Young lady that's third, probably the most intense one we have in the lineup. She does an awesome job of positioning her body where she puts her hands, and the way that she operates that sheep's head are absolutely incredible. She gets the job done quickly and efficiently. Maybe at times her intensity works to her disadvantage. She got that guy just a little more wound up than what I would term ideal. Maybe braced him just a little harder to where his spine didn't sit in him quite right. I challenge her to maybe step off, let that sheep relax a minute, settle his spine into him, know that sheep's body just a little bit better. But man, her intensity from start to finish today has been absolutely incredible. Let's give her a hand as well. Young lady that's 4, very similar in her style. Intensity is awesome. She's really good at how she positions herself. Her partner maybe wanted to give up on her just a little bit as the drive wore on. I talked with her earlier, talking about some things that we like and how we handle that sheep's head. She does a great job of where those ears get placed. That 90-degree angle and that sheep's nose placement is always on point. I think at times we maybe lose sight of watching that sheep's body and where he's at. I do, again, like I talked about the lady in front of her, I'd step off that guy, look at where his top line sits, maybe shake him off a little bit, and then get back into him to keep that sheep in check. I probably came down the line and found him in a few too many pieces from time to time, and that's why I maybe slide her down the line. But man, her intensity is awesome. She does a great job as well. And then the young lady that's 5th, I told her she's probably one of the best that we have in terms of bracing sheep. She's got a sheep that can certainly brace well for her. Kind of the same story. I told her at times I'd step off to the side, and because that sheep was overdriving, he'd come apart just a little bit more than what I term ideal. I told her to maybe let that nose relax, maybe relax that sheep when I'm down the line and not looking at her, to maybe keep him together just a bit more consistently. But she does a great job as well. All the way down the line here, these kids have done a fantastic job. I can only imagine the competition we're going to have in these older divisions. Let's give all our juniors a big hand.
what we do. I wouldn't do it right then.
I'm going to. It's fine. It's not gonna shouldn't affect.
say anything, so don't just say why you might.
Peyton is currently working heat 1 of intermediate showman and looks like he has stepped back about 7 head in this group. And we'll have 4 heats of intermediate showmanship. Just a quick reminder, if you were in the top 5, but particularly the Grand Reserve and Junior Showmanship, these meeting interns do need your photo for social media and the record books here. So if you've not got your picture taken behind the backdrop at the end of the show, make sure that one of these 2 meeting interns has captured your photo and connect with it at the end of the day.
First season of intermediate division is really good. We've got Seth, we're going to see back out here behind the kids table, but we're going to have some really deep teams as we go on through these little divisions as you would expect. The kids on this side do a really nice job. We're going to pick up the pace maybe just a little bit as we start to increase in experience level and skill level, maybe at some of those things the minute you do coming in the gate that maybe separates you. When I talk with the folks on this side, they're in probably enter with just a little bit more that look in their eye, and then that first instant that they got the chance to set those teeth over here, they maybe had them locked and loaded just a little bit quicker, and we're ready to go. So that's probably what separated them. And then some things relative to body position and the things we talked about there in that junior division with the folks on this side. They all do a really nice job. Let's give them a big hand to the people who do this intermediate division. Class 2, which is the first heat of the intermediate showmanship, ages 13 to 16 years of age. We have 7 returning in this heat. First is Haley Bird of Gerber, California. Second is Zane Downey of Montana.
Austin Evans of Oregon, Taylor Haynes of Arizona, Kenzie Hoekstra in Oakdale, California, Caitlin Campman of Orland, California, and James Kyriak of New Mexico. Congratulations to all 7 of you. We're working class 2. This is heat 2 of intermediate showmanship.
Someone's ringing me.
Yeah, really not, probably not with fun though.
No, it's significant.
Well, the Kansas City, not that far.
What is it? It's 8.
To our house, it's right outside.
Because you're like between Tucson Perry and Albuquerque.
Yeah, right. Just actually just over the mountain. Y'all haven't had a ways out here, huh?
Yeah. We made it to Albuquerque on Christmas Day and stayed, and then took off from there. Came in. Gene didn't come down?
Guilt was down. Got to use it.
Gotcha.
His wife is there, so he's going to try and scoot out of here for tonight and tomorrow.
Are any of the girls there close?
No. Cat right there in Oklahoma. He's got some boys and his wife there, so not here for his wife. They're over. They're kind of close too.
Yeah.
She's feeling more.
So you live close by?
15 miles away.
Yeah, you're right there.
Especially in Mexico, that's our biggest downfall. Keep an eye on all So south about 600 miles, then head up straight for the mountain, go right up next to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's dry, and it is nothing compared to where y'all are. It's definitely
I like it.
Yeah, we're in it all the time. I mean, you can see the turkey of it. We just hope for a little more
Moisture.
rain.
Yeah.
And this last year we actually had a decent.
So like cows around there, like how what's like stocking density there? Is it like
The way it's been here lately, they're pushing and I mean, some of it's rated at like 36, 40, 50 and stuff. We just take the out for it. I want to maintain having if you're getting for something,
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something.
I don't know what it is.
Live out there on grass.
I sent you some videos I took from home.
On average. Well, oh, that's good.
She watched something else with it.
But
I don't know if it didn't come in. And noticing
You got well?
it's all
Okay, they stay right here. I'm going to run to the restroom. It's out there, those buildings right
you get a bit more. small little area. Yeah, it's pretty limited. I know we got a couple more. This one.
Another really good group in our second heat of the intermediate division. The ones we're going to keep back, kind of the same story as we've been having in some of these other heats. I think consistency is key. I think body placement is key. And just knowing how to make that sheep look the part when I come down the line. We've got some really good showmen left over here. We talked about some things to me in this group just as a comment to the entire group about where we place our sheep in line, making sure that we're straight in that line. I think it's really important when you get this many head out here, we use our ring space. We keep the ring wide. We go to the outside of this circle so that you leave yourself enough space when you get over here on the profile. But a nice job done by all these kids. Again, we're going to be just a little more efficient here in this intermediate drive. You got to make it count the minute you come in the gate, and I think there's just some consistency things that favor the folks here to my right. But we're well of a group that we've got out here. If you guys would, again, let's compliment all of them and we'll keep working through this street.
We're basically like 45 minutes east of the board. So like Newton, Grinnell, pretty close to the midway.
Good, how are you, man?
Oh, my wife's got hitsy.
You got so happy.
You guys do Denver too?
Our returning intermediate year winners are Caitlin Etherly of Lubbock, Texas, Caitlin Kumianwa of Parker, Arizona, Molly Higgy of Oakland, Georgia, Claire Marita of Arizona, Olivia Sandy of Stephenville, Texas, Riley Clear of Alt, Colorado, and Riley Todd of Redmond, Oregon. Congratulations, you seven. See you back in the final.
And no matter, I mean, you can make stuff, make baggies, do whatever. It still ain't the same. When you get back, you're like, that's what happens. They're good. Just keep going. You guys just show sheep and goats. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like a club.
Dog man. Well, see, he moved here. He bought a house here. He goes back and forth.
Even him recognizing every most of the people that I know. It's yeah, very sure.
Okay, I better go.
Oh yeah. Did you bring sheep? Big?
Yep. It's one pig, so.
One pig? You can relax a little bit.
am.
When do you show? Oh, tomorrow? Or?
You got a while in that picture?
Obvious shit to do, right? He's on you to stay on
Another really, really good group, and we've got quite a few of them to pull back here out of this heat. So if we have to, when we get in our camping drive, maybe we'll make another cut and kind of narrow it down and not get too many sheep out here. But in my opinion, the kids that are deserving to come back for that second round need to come back and end up having 10 or 12 from the heat, then so be it. So I don't mind the numbers that we're going to have back. Truthfully, we could probably pull a few more of these off of this side. But in an effort to keep our numbers relatively manageable, we got to be really critical. And some of the things I talked about with the kids over here on this side maybe seem like really finite details to them. That's okay. Know that those are probably just personal things, in my opinion. And then if you walk out this gate, those things that I told you don't matter. You're coming to show the meeting again. I'm not here to change your showmanship style or change the way you do things. I'm here to share my thoughts on what you did and how it suited me and your ability to get the job done out here today. But a really good group from top to bottom, probably one of the deeper sets we've had so far today. Again, let's congratulate all these kids as we keep working through this division.
Super.
Well, I just don't like my color. But I thought next week. Take a place in my ass.
In heat number 3, we had 8 callbacks for our finals and intermediate showmanship, ages 13 to 16. Lexi Hunt of Arizona, Piper Liska of Arizona, Maggie McDonald of Arkansas, Wyatt Loretta of Arizona, Catherine Olson of Wyoming, Hannah Sievers of California, Lauren Turner of New Mexico, and Matt Weiss of Brownwood, Texas.
Oh, that's not what I got. Sorry.
She is from Nevada. That's in our brownie. It's for our brownie.
It's got the little area with the end that open hole here. Where in the standard?
Third or fourth spot. Fourth. And then there's only four.
to work on getting like kind of get it ready to
I wouldn't do it until after
Every situation you get put in is different, and every heat is different. And like I said, we don't have a magic number that we need to keep out of every heat. Out of each heat, it's my job to put together what will be the most competitive intermediate showman drive of Arizona National, and I think that's where the folks who are going to have to come back are going to add the most to that. I thought just the things that we've been preaching so far today in terms of consistency and body position and the way they can go back in, I thought they were the most effective at how they did that. Some really good stuff that maybe, in my opinion, were just missing a couple pieces here and there that I talked with them about that kept them really close. But again, when you get to this level of competition, those little things become like sorts of differences, and we can keep more kids back out here. But at the end of the day, again, we're trying to make the most competitive drive here in just a few minutes, and I think that's where these folks here to my right maybe surface amongst this group. But an incredible job done by all these kids again. Let's give them one big round of applause as they leave the ring.
Inning 4 of our intermediate showman. Our callbacks are Isabel Lowry of Montana, Eli Gator of New Mexico, Diana Nelson of California, Emily Park of California, Nadia Shakespeare of Nevada, and Carson Wagner of California. Now we're having all 4 heats back in for our champion intermediate showmen, ages 13 to 16 years of age. And Peyton will work through this large group of intermediates we have today. This is our largest division. Again, our judge today is Peyton Donner, originally from Nevada, Missouri, and went on to Butler Community College in El Dorado, Kansas, and is currently the assistant livestock judging coach at Kansas State University. Let's welcome Peyton Donner.
Even might have put too many sheep in there at one time. It's the most autistic circle I've
I want Reagan to
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
which will be approximately 12:30 on our schedule. We will have the goat fitting competition here in this arena at the conclusion of Chief Showmanship. Again, we ask all the grands and reserves of each division, top 5 if possible, of junior, intermediate, and senior, to go to the backdrop at the conclusion of the Chief Showmanship competition to get your photos made for social media and the archives of Arizona National. And then concluding the fitting competition, then we will move in at 3 p.m. to the goat showmanship, and our goal is to start that right at 3 p.m. today. We've also had several requests and inquiries on social media. The show today is on Facebook Live. So if you have family members back home and want to watch these drives, please encourage you to go to Facebook Live. The media interns here are doing a great job both in and outside the arena. We've got a multitude of university interns from across the nation this year, and we congratulate them for earning that opportunity and also appreciate their hard work. Let's give all these interns a big round of applause.
We'll see how we do. I don't have a show shot, so it's like strictly
I knew this was going to be tough, and I knew we were going to have a lot of them out here, but probably didn't really sink in until we got each one of them out here. My compliments to all the kids in this ring right now for A, getting to this spot and B, managing the competition out here as well as you have. We've got a ton of sheep and a ton of kids out here, and they manage their space very well. And to be truthful, I have no doubt in my mind that the other kids that are going to leave this ring here in just a minute are certainly deserving and certainly qualified to be competing on further in this competition today. And I have no doubt that they've each had their fair share of showmanship success. I have no doubt that they're going to continue to do so. When the competition gets to this level, though, and so many just little details that come down to what separates these 10, and we're going to rework real briefly here for our top 10 spots. And a lot of them are personal things. Showmanship is very subjective, and like I told some of the kids in one of those previous heats, the minute you guys walk out this ring, my opinion no longer matters to me today, and you just keep on doing what you're doing because each of you do such a great job. As I came down the line, I saw these were the 10 that every time I turned around, things were in the right place. They make it look easy. To me, I hope we've got juniors sitting around ringside. Heck, I hope we've got seniors sitting around ringside because they can probably learn a thing or two in this division. But my compliments to all these kids. These right here, we're just going to push you forward and do just a little bit more with you. Let's congratulate all these kids, though, that are about to leave the ring, because, man, this has been an absolutely incredible division.
Good, how are you? Going to go? Yes, good luck. You too.
How are we doing? Look at the ring, you know? No, not really. The white flag this way, right? Somewhere in there, yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Oh, there, thank you. I got your yellow flag. Okay, what else? Yeah, we're all here hanging out. Thought I had to close it and show. And the white flag.
Oh, yeah, she's up next. They're the next group.
Yeah.
Is there a Melissa Linden in the barn? Melissa Linden. We have found a lost item that is quite valuable. It is a Chase debit card. And Robin needed this week.
Go way over there. I know where the sitting place. Okay. What do you think about your preference? Got it. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Where's your mom?
While we're waiting here, we have a distinguished guest, Mr. Tyler Granville, who's Executive Director of the Arizona National, with us briefly. And Tyler, you do a lot of work in the last 2 years. It's probably not been a lot of fun in many ways. And this show couldn't be done without his leadership and direction. And as you know, and with experience with families, the entry levels here have just escalated over the years. Our family came, I think, 20 years ago, and this place has changed dramatically since then. So, Tyler, thank you. Thank you for your staff. Let's give Tyler and all of his crew a big round of applause.
We could let these kids longer and longer, and it probably wouldn't do any good. And so you kind of just bite the bullet and make a decision and manage the tough one. I said that there just a minute ago, but these teams do an absolutely incredible job. I challenge you to find a group of teams showing anywhere else in the country or any other show that could probably get it done any better than them. And what I like about this group is they all do it just a little bit differently. And I think that they are so far advanced. You know, we call this the intermediate division. I consider that middle of the road, I guess, in terms of experience and level. I remember to tell you, they're advanced. And so I hope the seniors bring the team equally as these kids did. And like I told you, it's some very little subjective things that, in my opinion, maybe sort this group. These three that we got left over here all do an incredible job. To me, they're the three that are the most similar in the way they do things in terms of their body position, in terms of where they put their hands on that sheep's head and how they maneuver that sheep's body. I think they probably most consistently just did the best job of making those huge look apart. And there's some differences still in the way they do things. We've got one that's probably the most intense in the trio, but maybe at times gets just a little quicker and things maybe fall out of place a few more times as we go longer in the drive here. We've got one that sits right in the middle, and then we've got one that's maybe just a little more cool, calm, and collected, but nothing's ever out of place. And like I said, we can do a lot of fancy stuff with these teams. To me, at the end of the day, none of that matters. They can get their feet stuck. They can get the job done effectively out here, and that's why they get to be our top three. And it's clicking here between the three of them. I guess to me, I think back to that very initial heat they came in the ring all the way to this point. To me, there's one young person amongst this trio that there's never been anything out of place. The leg, hair, nothing has ever come out of place. And yet they're still intense. Their eye contact is incredible. The way they position themselves on that animal is incredible. I think they're the best blend, in my opinion, of being intense and yet being so natural and just making it look easy. Young lady here at the back of the line. Incredible job too. These are the two that I talked about maybe being on the other end of the spectrum. The one that's going to be reserved, I thought maybe just more closely resembled our team just in terms of taking things maybe just a nickel easier, and because of that, she's probably staying in place just a little better. That's the young lady in the purple. She's going to be our reserve. Let's congratulate her. Young lady in the yellow, I love his connection. He comes out here and you can tell that he wants to win, and that's the attitude I like to see. I know his demeanor's got just a bit quicker as time went on. He maybe got worked up just a little more. That team maybe didn't want to work with him trying to hit him, but maybe his intensity is off. I talked to these young ladies about the job they did, and all the way down the line. Again, my apologies for taking a little bit longer, but that was an incredible group of showmen. Let's congratulate all of them one more time.
In our intermediate drive, our champion is Claire Moretta. Reserve, Catherine Olson. Third, Madden White. Fourth, Hannah Sievers. And fifth, Piper Lister. Let's give all these in the intermediate competition a big round of applause. What a great job and a really intense. Again, I want to recognize our sponsors that underwrote each of the gifts for our top sheep showmen today in each of the divisions that have done an outstanding job in their generosity. If you got to believe a livestock camp, and they are most generous with their tails and the banners that they contributed to the group. Additionally, our arena sponsors are Agrodyne, All Flex, All Red and Elliott Clubland, Bales Hay Supply, Blue Team Weathers of Texas, Zimmerman Trailer, Emerald Livestock, Empire Power Systems, Glam Jam, Hummel Livestock, JBS Packerland, KG Livestock Show Supplies, Nutrition by Design, Royer Show Stock, Jason Spence and the Spence and Company Livestock Auctioneers, Sullivan Show Supply, Tractor Supply, Weaver Leather Livestock Supply, WW Rodeo Livestock System and Scales, and the overall sponsor for the Showmanship. Again, You Gotta Believe Livestock Camp. And if you want to buy any of those banners and sponsors, please speak to Katie, and you can buy those for $50 a piece, and they would appreciate that. Also, remember to get to the backdrop before end of the day with our meeting interns in each of your respective divisions. We are now beginning heat 1 of our senior showmanship, ages 17 and up, and if there, I believe, is 3 heats in the senior division.
First team of our senior division, of course, dropped the heat like you'd expect. We've got a group of showmen that are going to come back and I think set the standard very high. We've got some left over here that do equally as good of a job. And I guess for me at the senior level, you can't sugarcoat things. There's not really room for mistakes when you come out here on this big ring and you've got this kind of competition. Everything has to be hitting its stride perfectly. And there's just a few little details in some of these kids that I thought were close about pulling over in terms of knowing their animal and how it looks from my viewpoint and what you need to do to get that sheep looking the part. But we're going to send these kids out, rework these in just a minute. Let's congratulate all the kids in our first team of the seniors on a job well done.
I gotta go.
Emma Cardew, your heat is ready to go in the ring for Showmanship. Emma Cardew. Our callbacks in each one of our senior showmen, ages 17 to 21, are Rose Davies of Idaho. In addition, Colton Hoekstra of Eastland, Texas. Allison Sandy of Stephenville, Texas. Haley Seaver of Redwood, California. And Kaylee Stone of Arkansas. Let's congratulate each one callback winner. And we have each two in the arena at this time. There are 3 each of senior showmanship. At the conclusion of the senior showmanship champion, we ask that everybody come back for photos in the backdrop. And the ghost fitting competition will begin here in this arena at the conclusion. And ghost showmanship to start immediately following at approximately 3 p.m.
And maybe a couple years
I mean, we don't need it. I think the battery is like dead. The battery is not yeah, we're not gonna need it.
That's all right, we can.
There's only 2 more sets after this. Kill my boss.
Paige Bowen needs you for senior showmanship. Paige Bowen.
Again, I don't think there's a magic number, and obviously we're going to pull several back from this particular heat. I think we've got an awesome group, a really deep group, probably the deepest showmanship heat we've had so far, and there's still some kids sitting on this side of the lineup that I think are awfully deserving as well. Again, we may have to make that initial cut in our drive here in a minute, but in order to make it the most competitive and give these kids who I thought maybe surfaced and need that chance to really prove themselves in a changing drive, we keep 10 back, we keep 10 back. And so my compliments to these kids, again, senior showmanship at the Arizona National is going to be really competitive, and there's just some of those little things that we maybe got to tweak for my personal liking, or things that maybe I caught something out of place that at this stage of the game just can't happen. So my compliments to all the kids here, another really good group. Let's congratulate all of them.
Mom, there's three. Yeah, there's three. Yeah, that's the one to... What intermediate classes are you guys in? Sorry, talk. Oh, but there's a... That I wanted to...
Callbacks from Heat 2 of Senior Showmanship are Kylie Kunzler of Utah, Jarrah Brown of Oklahoma, Ainsley Gilmore of Colorado, and Chancelyn Johnson of Gulf, California, Zachary Moore of California, and Braxton Olson of Wyoming. Let's congratulate each of those callbacks for our senior Heat 2. remaining. We also have 3 more that were on the next page, and that's my mistake. So Colton Severa, California, Anna Stratton of Nevada, and Hannah Whetstone of Howard, Kansas.
Or something like
really good group to finish us out in our senior division, and I guess to me, thinking about how can we make the most competitive senior showmanship drive, I thought the 4 young people were going to have to come back. We're probably going to add to that competitive nature the most effectively as we bring them back out here. Not to take anything away from the group of people there on the other side of the ring. They all did a really nice job, but some things maybe that I would change just in terms of the way they operate the mechanics of showmanship is really knowing their teeth and what needs to be done to make them look the part when they come down the line. I think these 4 are going to be really competitive as we bring them back out here, though. Again, let's congratulate all the kids and we'll work to our senior drive.
They just like they cut up.
I mean, yeah, would have.
Yes. So we're going to run over and take it. Say I gave it to him. I know what I'm going to do.
Fort Bridger, Wyoming. Also Hadley Owen of Torrington, Wyoming. Haley Price of Lubbock, Texas, and Macy Roselle of Adams, Oregon. Congratulations, and we will now have our senior champion drive of senior showmanship, ages 17 to 21. Again, let's congratulate all these senior winners.
Thank you.
You're good.
Extended, I forgot this, but they extended the age limit. So because of COVID, so they let people so tomorrow is going to be very I think I it's like
senior showmanship. Mr. Peyton Dammer will be selecting our champion and reserve, and then our top 5, sponsored by You Gotta Believe Livestock Camps. And we appreciate your generosity and support sponsors today.
Yeah, he was like, okay. He was like, yeah, someone else tells me. No, he was walking back. In his school, people like, yeah, are that? Yeah, love that. His story with the no, when he was talking about because it was yeah, I think Sid watched it. Yeah, you're right.
We wrap up here. We're going to rework these 10 here on my right. Really good group of senior showmen. I hope we got some of the youngsters around ringside that are watching and can learn. And maybe, not as many numbers as we have there in the immediate side of things, but I think all the way down the line, these kids do a really good job. The kids on this side of the ring that we're going to introduce here, I think they're certainly deserving of recognition. And in the right day, I have no doubt to be singing on this side again today. It's my, what you guys might consider worthless opinion today, and that's okay. I hope that the youngsters that walk out of the ring are mad at me because it shows you care, and you don't get to this point at a national stage without being competitive. So know that you do a really good job, and know that you have the skill to be on this side of the queue maybe next time around. I thought you did an awesome job. Again, just some of those little things that maybe I put more preference in. Let's congratulate them. We're going to rework our top 10 here.
Senior showman. One other individual that needs a lot of recognition, that gets a lot of volunteer time, is Thor Sorensen, our chief citizen business. Let's give him a great round of applause for his dedication towards the endless hours of work here.
No,
A little adjustment in our schedule today. Due to some power reflected issue here, they're going to move the goat fitting competition to the west end of the green bowling building. And you can go over there with your equipment set up shortly. And Sullivan Field Supply team will be administering that competition. We will start at promptly 3 o'clock here for the goat showmanship. And also start tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with the goat show. So just those few adjustments in your schedule, but a reminder that everybody that wants photos behind the backdrop, do that here at the conclusion of each division. I want to also recognize somebody that's been in and out of here and worked extremely hard, both on the phone, emails, and behind the scenes. I introduced Tyler a while ago, but his sidekick is Katie Eslick here. Katie worked really, really hard behind the scenes. Let's give Katie a big round of applause.
So we finished up the day here, man. I knew it was going to be good, and I knew that we started the day with a really competitive junior division. The intermediates absolutely blew me away, and then the seniors get out here, and a lot of lessons to be taught on showmanship. I think back to when I was showing, and I can assure you that I was not nearly as good as any of these kids out here. And my compliments to the 10 that we've got left. And then we boil it down to these 3. And truthfully, the little switcheroo we did there is about as fancy as I like to get. To me, you know, you can make a pass down the line and you can work kids harder and harder. I guess I just wanted to see how they would react and how things would go in that position. But to me, showmanship is just about how do you get your animal presented and how do you get the job done. And let me tell you, these 3 young ladies can just flat do that. I think you could put a rabbit, a dog, a chicken, a calf, a pig, it doesn't matter what it is in their hand, and they're going to be the type of showman that can just get it done. And what I like about them is that the 3 of them are so incredibly intense, and yet they make it look easy. They make it look natural. And if you get out here, you know, we got to pick a winner amongst the 3. It's tough, let me tell you. You can just close your eyes, point your finger in one direction and be right. And so I guess to me, I think back to that initial heat. I think that how they've done to this point, there's maybe just a few little details or little things at times where maybe I caught something a little more out of place, or one maybe was just a bit quicker. And again, those are so minute details that it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. What does matter is that we've got 10 incredibly good showmen. These 3 fought it out to get to this point. And so my compliments to them. You know, I guess as I studied the 3 of them and the job they've done from start to finish, there's one who probably the least amount of time did I see something out of place. There's one that, you know, we did the little switcheroo there, and initially it was just lights out. That thing was locked and loaded and in place, and I can tell that she just got the natural ability to grab one and get the job done. Not to take anything away from the other 2, because that's such a small detail, but the young lady there in the middle is going to be our king. You know, they do things a little bit differently. One's maybe just a little more intense, one's maybe a little more calm and collected, and probably has to work a little harder to be truthful. But I like the fact that she knows what she has to do to make that sheep look the part. I guess to me, again, first impressions are big in senior showmanship as well. But I've talked all day about how to me you got to treat sheep, and I think showmanship is those who know what they need to do to make that animal look the part. A reserve showman maybe has to work a little harder, pull that belly up, and her partner's maybe not cooperating as well, but she knows what she needs to do. That's the young lady right here behind her. She's going to be reserved. The young lady that's going to be started out an incredible job as well. Her intensity, I think, is off the charts. She's got the stare down, kind of down, looking like she wants to fight me. I like that because she's so intense. Her body position is awesome, and the way she handled that sheep front end is awesome. I think back to that initial heat, she maybe, you know, didn't get as much drive out of that sheep at times. She maybe, for being so intense in her demeanor at times, maybe just didn't get as much out of her sheep. But that's such a small detail. To show a sheep for me any day because you do an awesome job. I talked to 4 and 5, and then the work that they